All right, man, peace. So, brothers, over the course of the last 3+ years, whether it be on YouTube or now on Patreon, I've always tried to diligently lay out the various mechanisms that are used by this Babylonian society to almost always ensure that the so-called black man does not become a solution-oriented thinker, because the powers that be understand that once the so-called black man no longer depends on the other nations or the quote-unquote other races, the mainstream media, or the acceptance of others for his own sustenance and well-being, that is when this kingdom is going to fall. You are the linchpin. That is why they're always pawning the so-called black man, even within his own community. As I've stated in the past, on the conservative side of the totem pole, the so-called black man does not even exist. On the quote-unquote liberal or democratic version of that same totem pole, we're at the very bottom. They do not care about the so-called black man at all. That is why my channel is a pro-truth channel geared towards the so-called black man. The main thing that they want the so-called black man to believe is that he has allies. And it's not until the so-called black man accepts that his number one ally is the Most High, his number two ally is himself, and his number three ally is his brother, that being like-minded so-called black men who put the Most High first. That is when the changes will be made, because we already have a book of statutes and laws for us to adhere to, so that when we go off a little bit, we can try to correct ourselves. They're constantly trying to entice the so-called black man to immerse himself in his emotions. Once you're immersed in your emotions, you can be easily manipulated. To be quite honest with you, and I've said this many times in the past, most so-called black men in this society think like women. You conduct yourself how you think. So therefore, most so-called black men conduct themselves like women. That is why the new in thing, or the new popular thing, is for so-called black men to push and promote for black female leadership. I see it everywhere now. I've even just recently seen it on the new Craig Hodges interview that he did with Blot TV, where he states, according to his woke understanding of society, that he can see that the black woman is taking over, and that's a great thing. What that basically is an admission by the woke Negro that he has no answers. Woke Negroes, quote unquote liberal Negroes, they have no solutions, no answers for anything at all. All they can do is emote and throw tantrums, and at the end of it, return back to their original state, and then push forth these vain hopes of idealism that things are going to change. Hoping for something never gets the job done. We have to lay out plans. But because the so-called black man has been trained to think like a woman, he's now become unable to construct a plan for himself. I'm not talking about all so-called black men. Just a good majority of so-called black men, to be quite frank with you, are unable to come up with macrocosmic plans. That is why we're not trusted as leaders. How can you be trusted as a coach or as a manager or as an executive in a corporation when you're not even willing to take over your household? It's not until we're willing to do those things that we're going to be trusted to do these other things, for you brothers out there who are searching for the acceptance from the other races. We have to change how we view ourselves in order to change how other people view us. That's the only way that it's going to happen. I'm bringing all of this up because there was a very interesting conversation that Skip and Shannon had, in which Skip Bayless asked Shannon Sharp what his solutions are for the so-called black community, especially in light of the George Floyd protests. So, of course, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Welcome back to Undisputed. Well, guys, protests continued all across the country yesterday, and we also saw a nationwide movement called Blackout Tuesday that started in the music industry,
which, as many of you brothers directly deduced, was a Saturnian ritual that was executed by the witches in the entertainment industry. It's their job to constantly fan the flames of racial antipathy and point out things to low-level so-called black people. Oh, wow, I can't believe how the police treated that black guy. Oh, my goodness, I can't believe what the police did to that black guy over there. They don't care about you, so-called black man. They're just trying to pawn you out. And everyone's in on it. It's like that great scene near the end of Shawshank Redemption, when the warden is in Andy Dufresne's cell, and the guards are standing around, and Red is standing there, and the warden gets frustrated because Andy Dufresne, he was the guy making him all the money. He's trying to figure out where the fuck he went. And he picks up those pebbles, he starts throwing them. He says, you're all in on it. Even her. He points to the poster because it's the truth. It's one big practical joke that they're playing on you, so-called black man. Even the liberal black woman is in on it. It's just that she's unwittingly in on it. But subconsciously, she knows that all of this is really just to keep the so-called black man subjugated. That's why they're feting her. Somebody asked me about the new Rolling Stone magazine cover, which basically depicts Isis Lactans and the quote-unquote divine child. As I've been telling you, brothers, the mother goddess and the divine child are the quote-unquote deities for the masses. They want all nations of people who are amongst the masses to worship the mother goddess and her son. Now, behind the curtain, they're worshiping the horn god. They're going to slowly implement worship of the horn god on the masses as well, or at least try to. But in the meantime, the most powerful spiritual force in this three-dimensional zone that we're in is the so-called black man. He generates the most energy. So he has to be used before he wakes up. And that's what they're doing right now. And they use your so-called woman against you because they know that the so-called black woman, like all women, have the nature of Eve. They love chaos. They're the origin of chaos. So whenever you want to push, propagate, and promote chaos, you always work through the woman.
Really took over social media yesterday, and the bottom line, things need to change. And Shannon, I'd like to start with you specifically. What changes are you looking for? What would you like to see happen?
Brothers, let me say this very quickly before Shannon Sharp speaks, because you're going to notice he's going to pause a lot. And look, the brother does his best. I like Shannon. I think that he's very intelligent. He has great memory recall, but he is a liberal Negro, so that means that he's mentally disturbed. You're going to find that a lot of what he says is based on presumption. He's not able to start from square one. He's going to jump to square 5 and 6, where he starts to speak about politics and what politicians are supposed to do for the so-called black community. Brothers, politicians work for whoever can offer them the most. That is how this political structure has been created. You cannot wait until a politician is presented to the so-called black community to think that they're going to do something for you. That's not how they work. They're going to serve the most powerful faction. Right now, the so-called black community is the least powerful because we're the least knowledgeable. We have no knowledge of ourselves. Therefore, we have no idea how to spend our money. We're not willing to invest in one another. If you want power in the political field or in the political sphere, I've stated this in previous videos. This is just basic sociopolitics. You have to raise up a politician from their youth. You cannot wait until they present one to you. By the time they presented a politician to you, he's already been trained in various Luciferian ideologies. He's already been trained in double talk, or she's been trained in double talk. They're witches. The political sphere is a part of the entertainment sphere. You understand that? So they're actors. Their job is to make sure that they can accrue enough money for their sponsors to keep themselves in power. Politics is about sponsorship. That's it. So they're going to always cater to their base, as they're supposed to. So-called black people are the only demographic who think that people are supposed to cater to us, despite the fact that we have no idea how to show influence. The first thing that we have to provide is an understanding amongst ourselves of discipline, meaning what? There should be no non-black businesses in the so-called black community. None. People out here marching for police brutality or against police brutality. They're marching for George Floyd. You should be marching and protesting to have all non-black businesses removed from the so-called black community. A so-called black man cannot go to Chinatown and open up a business, but the Asian man can come to the so-called black community and open up a laundromat, a restaurant, and a dry cleaners, and be a millionaire within 3 years, and barely speak English. Because niggas will go to his establishments and make sure that he gets rich and stays rich. The Korean can open up the fruit stands, right? The East Indians can open up the convenience stores. The so-called Arabs, they have the corner stores. You cannot go to any of their communities as a so-called black man and open up a business. You just can't. Tyrone can't go to Chinatown and open up the barbecue restaurant. They'll burn that shit down. So we have to have an understanding on how to create power. Number one rule to create power is what? All money in, no money out. Until we grasp exclusivity and the power of exclusivity, we're never going to have political power. That's why I stated that the George Floyd and the Ahmaud Arbery rituals They were globalism rituals. Dissolve and rebuild. Why do you think all these protests are 85 to 90% non-black? They're promoting globalism. They're pawning you, so-called black man.
Skip, what I would like to see is that I want to see them implement just how the system was in place for 400 years. I want them to start at the local level.
So-called black people love rambling about this 400 years notion. Our people were not in slavery for 400 years. In 1619, the ships that came here had both white and black indentured servants. Okay? This notion that so-called black people have been in hardcore slavery from the 1400s or the 1600s is just not true. Some of us came here as slaves. Some of us came here as refugees. Some of us came here as explorers. There's always a concerted attempt by the liberal black to equate black with slave because that's what they're taught by their gods, by their masters, the liberal Caucasian, because the liberal Caucasian needs to victim monger. You have to embrace the role of the victim in order to roll with the liberal Caucasian.
But what you're going to do is you're going to put people in office, mayors, city councilmen and women, and you're going to have to change the police department and how they interact with people of color.
Brothers, the reason why they're pushing this police conversation so hard is because it's the easiest conversation to push. Is police brutality an issue in the so-called black community? Absolutely. Is it an issue overall? Absolutely. But is it the number one problem in the so-called black community? Is it deserving of this much attention when held in juxtaposition or viewed in juxtaposition to all the other problems in our community? Absolutely not. Because once we solve the real problems in our community, the police issue will go away. I have a series on YouTube called Should Black People Be the New Police Force in the So-Called Black Community? Of course, the answer is yes. But once again, our people have a very difficult time looking at each other as authority figures, especially black males as authority figures. Why is that? Because there's no black male in the home. There's no real community culture being taught. If you line up 20 Negroes, they all believe 20 different things. One guy believes in Kemet. The other guy believes that he's a Moor. The other guy believes that he's a Muslim. The other guy goes to the Catholic Church. This guy goes to the Christian Church. So that's the issue in the so-called black community. It's a fractured culture. And there's no father in the home. There's no father leading the home. The man brings order, or at least he's supposed to. The woman in her right mind is essential, beautiful, wonderful. Most of these women are not in their right fucking mind. Why is that? Because proverbially speaking, they're listening to the serpent, just like Eve in the garden. So just getting back to what Shannon Sharpe is talking about and what everybody's talking about out here, this is just a distraction technique, this police conversation. They want to get rid of the police and really bring in a global police force. Because, and when I say they, I'm talking about the so-called Democrats. The Democratic Party is just a front for international Marxist factions. The Black Lives Matter movement is just a front for the Democratic Party. They're a collection agency for the Democratic Party. I hope that you brothers understand that. It's very integral that you grasp that. It was no surprise when Candace Owens and numerous other people went on the Black Lives Matter website, or as I call them, the Black Lesbians Matter website, and revealed that their donations go to this entity known as Act Blue, which is basically just a collection agency for the Democratic Party. I've told you brothers repeatedly that that is the hierarchy. Liberal blacks report to liberal Caucasians. The liberal Caucasian reports to the liberal Caucasian Jew. And on an international scale, the liberal Caucasian Jew, aka the international bankers and financiers, are working with China. So now hopefully you understand why many of these Democratic governors and mayors use Marxist and communist tactics when they preside over the masses of the people.
That's got to be it. So we're going to start at the local level because that's how they did it. And then we're going to unravel it at the local level.
Brothers, we do not have the organizational skills right now to unravel anything. In order to unravel politics, we have to unravel a lot of the confusion in the household. Shannon Sharpe is just talking. There's no disrespect to the brother, but he don't have the answers. And he's not supposed to. He's a former football player who reads a lot. I like the brother. He's entertaining on TV. But he don't have the answers for what's going on here. And the real issue is that the so-called black man does not view himself as a leader. You can get on TV and call yourself a king and the black woman's a queen. Y'all love doing that shit. But you do not exhibit the traits of the kings and the queens that you call yourselves, because number one, we have to rule over ourselves before we rule over anybody else. If we cannot rule over ourselves, we can't rule over anybody else. None of us are perfect. But at the end of the day, we have to preside over our own household before we go out and tell the political sphere how they're going to operate. Once again, we have to raise up politicians from their youth. All of these top politicians knew that they were going to enter the political world from when they were 4 years old, 5 years old. Don't let them fool you. Their official biography, oh, you know, when I went to college, I realized I wanted to become a public servant. Bullshit. In order for you to become governors and senators, I'm not talking about the low-level people, city council, all that other shit. In order for you to become governors, senators, and higher, president, things like that, you were trained from your youth to be that shit.
And then we're going to take it to the state level. So mayors, city councilmen and women, state representatives, we're going to do that. We're going to work because Skip, if you know,
you're talking about more black representation at the lower level.
Yeah, if we can get that, but
no, what he really means is more democratic. Whenever you see these woke Negroes on TV, they love talking about voting. We got to get out there and vote. Just get out there and vote. What they really mean is vote Democrat. That's obvious, because the Democratic plantation is very seductive for the liberal Negro, because what the Democrats always promise is brotherhood. The so-called black man does not see any appeal in the togetherness and the unity of his own people. He can't see life without the so-called white man giving him a hug and validating his existence.
Put people in office where there might not be any black candidates, okay, but we're going to get white candidates. If you're not, listen, this is what we want. You want our vote? This is what we're going to need you to do.
So how is that different from the last 40 or 50 years or so that so-called black people have claimed to tell white politicians what we need from you? Even Skip Bayless is rolling his eyes in his mind. He's like, nigger, please. But he has to let Shannon keep talking, because if you watch this show now, especially when you talk about race, Skip Bayless basically acts as Shannon Sharp's handler. He sits back and lets Shannon vent, because he knows that Shannon is just so frustrated about race from his past or his own frustrations at his inability to be accepted by the Caucasian. Skip knows how to handle Shannon perfectly. He can almost finish Shannon's sentences.
We're going to, you say, okay, yeah, this is what I do. This is what I'm willing to do. Mm-hmm. We put your butt in office and you don't do that. We're going to put your butt out of office. Skip, maybe, you know what? A lot of times we might have to put term limits on this thing too.
Now, this is the best thing that he said right here. Shorter terms. Instead of 4 years, make the terms 2 years.
A lot of times we get people in there and they stay 4 or 6 years and they don't do nothing. Yeah. Now we're going to put you on a 2-year term. That way, if you don't do it, we can get you up out of there. Yeah. So we're not going to let you stay in there, 55 years, because we see some of these senators, Skip, they've been in there for 20, 30 years and they did absolutely nothing.
2-year term, and every year you get reevaluated and possibly recalled after 1 year. I would like something like that. That would definitely make sense. And I'm not involved in politics at all. I'm apolitical. But that was one good idea that he had. Is it something that's going to heavily impact the issues that we have as so-called black people? Not necessarily, but that was a good idea from a political perspective.
Because they get the big corporate dollars and they're more interested in what they have to say.
Because money talks, Shannon Sharp. The so-called black man and woman have the most powerful buying dollar. They view us only as consumers. But because we spend our money, particularly amongst the other races, they don't value our influence, because they say the so-called black man and woman, they have no spending discipline. And I've explained this in other videos. People say, well, how come the banks are not as willing to lend to black business owners? The reason why banks are not as willing to lend to black business owners or prospective black business owners is because the first thing that the bank is going to evaluate is your potential to pay them back. So they need to believe that you're a viable candidate to have a successful business. In order for you to be a viable candidate to have a successful business, they have to believe that there's a market out there that's going to service you, or that's going to want your services. And as a so-called black man, the bank is saying black people don't even support black businesses, so why should we support you? It's just the facts. Now, of course, there are other racially oriented agendas that want to see other races profit more. There's no doubt about that. But that is a factor that they understand, that so-called black people do not support black businesses. So why should we invest in what you're doing?
Than what the people have to say. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start there. How do these police departments interact with people of color in their communities? Because we need to get that resolved first, Skip, before we have another George Floyd or another Tamir Rice or Trayvon Martin in situation.
Now, this is what I call falling down the social media rabbit hole. And this is something that the mainstream liberal media loves to do. We're in a country now where supposedly there are 30 to 35 million black people, however much the number is. So let's say that there are 35 million black people, quote unquote, so-called black people. So we could put the number of so-called black men at somewhere around 15 to 17 million. What the mainstream liberal media does is they highlight the death of one singular so-called black man. And they understand that that's going to be perfect fodder for the highly emotional liberal Negro who always acts as the mouthpiece or the speaker for the entire so-called black community. Most of the measured so-called black people don't say anything. They evaluate the case piece by piece. They understand that racism is certainly a real thing. Police brutality is certainly a real thing. But they're not going to fly off the handle for every situation. Like, for example, the Ahmaud Arbery situation or the Rayshard Brooks situation. There's nuance there. Did Rayshard Brooks necessarily deserve to get killed? That's up for debate. To be honest with you, once you lay your hands on two police officers and you're shooting one of their weapons at them, I can't say that that's a huge problem for me to say that he certainly did not deserve to get shot. Well, how come they shot him in the back? Police officers are taught to shoot center mass because if you aim for the legs, the bullet can ricochet off the ground and hit a bystander. So the easiest solution is what? Don't resist arrest. Don't drive drunk. But that would mean accountability. And when you're an emotionally disturbed Negro, you're not dealing with accountability. You're dealing with the blame game. Unfortunately, emotionally disturbed liberal Negroes are cast as representing the majority of so-called black people. And they don't represent the majority of so-called black people or the intelligent component of so-called black people any more than the Confederate flag wearing, pickup truck driving Caucasian represents, certain Caucasians who might be able to evaluate stories, situations, and narratives based on nuance. So those two parties, they fit in very well. And I don't want to digress too much, but there was a story involving the head football coach of the Oklahoma State University football team, and his running back, who decided that the running back I'm talking about decided that he was offended by a T-shirt that the head coach was wearing that had OAN on it, and said, I'm not going to stand for that just because that website is a news network that is quote unquote alt-right. So if you're going to come against that coach for wearing a T-shirt that you don't agree with, how could you get upset when a Caucasian person says you're wearing a T-shirt that has, an Ice Cube album name on it, like, America spelled with 3 Ks? It goes both ways. But like I've stated, the liberal Negro and the Caucasian, especially the strident race soldier Caucasian, they have a mutual infatuation with one another. And Shannon Sharpe is definitely down that woke rabbit hole. So it's very difficult for him to be able to make deep evaluations when everything with him is based so much in emotion.
This is like that, Skip. We're done with it. We're done. Well, we can only do so. No, you can do a lot more than what you're doing. Okay. And then we're going to
what, so-called black people, we can do a lot more than what we're doing. The same way that you can march and protest for 20 and 25 straight days against police brutality, we could put forth the same effort to get the gang members removed from the so-called black community, to get the drug dealers removed from the so-called black community. And watch how much better things get right off the bat. But that's not going to happen. You know why? Because gang members and drug dealers are not viewed as being coons and sellouts. They're viewed as being the ones who quote unquote keep it real.
To the national level, we're going to put senators. We're going to vote y'all butt out of there. We're going to get...
Shannon don't even believe what he's saying right now.
We're going to get the president because we need a policy shift. Because right now, Skip, And what they've done is they've done a great job, Skip. While there's so many things going on, we don't see, but behind the scenes, old sneaky Mitch McConnell, Skip, he's just confirming unqualified after unqualified after unqualified judge. And these guys get appointed to lifetime positions. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, there's 197 of them. And they're convening right now to try to get some more in there. And
when you say some more, you're talking about conservative judges, Shannon Sharp. Be specific. A lot of these toxic liberals, they get on TV and they always try to act like what they're saying is not partisan. But everything that comes out of their mouth is partisan. They want every government official to be super liberal, to be pro-pansexual, pro-abortion, and everything under the sun. And they think that that's going to solve all their problems.
Lindsey Graham, old sneaky Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, he think it's slick. He's urging all the older federal judges, guys, y'all need to go ahead and retire so we can confirm these other guys that President Trump want to get done. So they're going to...
More Trump blame mongering. You know, Shannon Sharp will be perfect in a TV show with Jason Whitlock. They'll be perfect to balance out one another. But the show wouldn't last more than 2 or 3 days because by day 2, Shannon will be trying to choke Whitlock. Because super liberal Negroes like Shannon Sharp, they can't deal with someone who's refuting their madness and their nonsense. Everything with him is about blue states and red states. Ask Shannon Sharp about the ardent racism of the Bay Area, especially in Silicon Valley, with all of those tech nerds. How many so-called black men are allowed to work out there? It's like, what, 97, 98% white male out in Silicon Valley? Why is that? Why is it in areas that are quote-unquote liberal, like Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Vermont, those places are all 98%, 97% Caucasian? They don't welcome Negroes up there either?
The court system. So if something happens at the local level, Skip, let's just say they do something and a settlement happens or we try to hold them accountable. They're going to file an appeal. It's going to go to one of these jackleg judges, and guess what? It's going to get tossed out. So they think they're slick. But that's what we're going to do, Skip. We're going to enact policy.
Bro, you're not going to do shit. Let's just be for real. Our people have very little ability to combine on anything as detailed as that's going to take. To be focused on judges and certain politicians and things of that nature? No. And there's such a thing as the silent majority. A lot of moderate liberals have decided to cross over and become moderate conservatives in the aftermath of these George Floyd riots. I promise you that. The wanton burning, disrespect, looting, rioting has turned off a lot of people who were formerly moderate liberals, both Caucasian and people of other races. I promise you, they've turned over to the conservative side. That's why I say they're pawning you, so-called black men. They put you on TV and surround you with a bunch of super liberal, no idea having Caucasians and people of other races who are just out there because they have nothing else better to do due to this COVID-19 pandemic. They wanted to get out the house. So now they act like they're going to care about a nigga. When the smoke clears, very few laws of consequence will have been passed, and things are going to go right back to how they've always gone. That being the so-called heterosexual black man being the last hired, first fired, having no control over your household whatsoever because none of these issues have you brought to the table. You're only concerned about quote-unquote police brutality.
Policy changes at the local level first because police is a state. So we're going to do that first, and then we're going to go big picture. We're going to go national level. We're going to get policy that affect all states.
In other words, you're talking about a Democratic president who's going to pass a federal mandate or a federal reform that's going to satiate liberal Negroes and their infatuation with quote-unquote racist police policies. Don't get it twisted. Once again, racism amongst the police is a major deal. But we have so many issues within our community, it's not anywhere near number one.
But we're going to start there first. We're going to start small. See, a lot of times we start too big. We think too big. Let's start at the local level like they did first. They enacted laws at the local and state level that impacted, and then they went big and made it a national law. So that's what we're going to do.
Got it. By the way, I saw Greg Popovich, coach of my San Antonio Spurs, say the other day that Mitch McConnell is running the country, not Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
That Trump doesn't realize it, but that's what Pop said. So,
You mean old CIA Greg Popovich? That guy, he needs an Academy Award.
I don't know. I'm just repeating what my coach said.
The Kentuckian.
Okay. I love this question because I am tired of even hearing people at the rallies, the demonstrators, the protesters, yell, it's time for action. And I haven't heard enough people, that's why I wanted to hear your take, say, this is what needs to, the specific.
Skip Bayless, that's because there's been this notion passed around amongst so-called woke blacks that they should only have to complain and not bring forth solutions. That it's the so-called white man's job to come up with the solution. They'll use the excuse of, well, y'all the one that put us in this situation. You have to come with the solution. All that really translates to is, white daddy, please help me out. I'm trying to find a way to make you love me. I don't trust my own